Okay, so today we're going to be basically going over the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, how thyroid hormone is actually made, what thyroid hormone actually is, and then what it's going to do in the body. So let's start with the basic anatomy. So the thyroid gland is going to be located in front of the trachea and below the thyroid cartilage, and it's going to have two different lobes, a right lobe, left lobe, and then the small thing, basically like an island called an isthmus that connects them. And then on the back of the thyroid, so over here, we're going to have two pairs of parathyroid glands. So two pairs, 4 parathyroid glands in total, and then they're each going to be separated by dense capsules. But we're going to come back to parathyroid glands later. For now, let's just stick to the thyroid gland itself. So, okay, over here, we're going to have a diagram of what the thyroid gland looks like. And then here's kind of a cross section of it. So if you notice, there are a couple important things inside of it. First off, we're going to have the follicular cells. So these small pink cells over here, and each follicular cell is going to be responsible for actually creating the thyroid hormone. Now, inside the sphere of follicular cells, we have a viscous colloid that contains thyroglobulin, which has a large amount of tyrosine. So don't forget that. The follicular cell over here, the viscous colloid, and inside the viscous colloid is thyroglobulin with the large amount of tyrosine. Now, the entire sphere of follicular cells and the colloid inside are going to constitute the thyroid follicle. So the thyroid follicle includes this entire structure. And then outside of there, we're going to have capillaries, and each capillary is basically going to be similar to any other place in the body. In this case, they're going to provide nutrients and regulatory hormones to the glandular cells, and they're going to remove secretory products and metabolic waste. So let's get to the actual important part. What are thyroid hormones? So thyroid hormones are going to be T3, which is going to be triiodothyronine, and T4, which is thyroxine. When someone says thyroid hormone, these are what they're talking about. So what do T3 and T4 do? First off, how are they actually made? How does the thyroid gland make thyroid hormones? So it's a two-step solution. So the first step is going to be the follicular cells over here are going to synthesize thyroglobulin, the protein I mentioned before, and it's going to secrete thyroglobulin into the viscous colloid. And the thyroglobulin is going to have a large amount of tyrosine, like we mentioned before, which is going to be 1/2 of what we need to make thyroid hormone. Second step, every day we're going to eat stuff like seaweed, milk, salt, etc. that has iodine in it. Iodine is going to be transferred from the digestive tract actively into the thyroid gland, and carrier proteins at the basement membrane of the follicular cell are going to transfer iodine to the cytoplasm, and they're going to diffuse onto the apical surface of each follicular cell. Then thyroid peroxidase is going to convert iodine from I negative to I positive, and then 1 to 2 molecules of active iodine are going to bind to the tyrosine portion of thyroglobulin. Okay, so one more time. Inside the viscous colloid, we have thyroglobulin, which has tyrosine. Inside the follicular cell, we're going to have thyroid peroxidase, which converts from I negative to I positive, and then iodine and tyrosine are going to form a covalent bond, which makes T3 and T4. So essentially, T3 and T4 are going to be iodine and tyrosine covalently bonded. Okay, sorry for the bad handwriting. But I positive and tyrosine, I plus iodine and tyrosine are going to be covalently bonded to make T3 and T4. So T3 and T4, we're going to have about 4 to 8 molecules that are going to bind to thyroglobulin. Now, how do T3 and T4 actually leave the thyroid gland to get to the rest of the cells in the body? Well, basically, that's going to be the responsibility of TSH. TSH is very important. It's going to have a couple of different roles. It's going to basically increase the amount of uptake of iodide into the follicular cell. It's going to increase the synthesis of thyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase. But most importantly, it's going to tell the follicle cells, so it's going to tell these follicle cells that have thyroid hormone in it now to endocytose or swallow the thyroglobulin molecule with the attached T3 and T4. And then lysosomal enzymes inside the cell break down thyroglobulin, and then amino acids are reused, and the released T3 and T4 diffuse into the bloodstream. So essentially, TSH is going to tell the follicular cells to swallow thyroglobulin, and then it's going to eventually be released into the bloodstream. Now, T3 and T4 in the bloodstream have a couple different roles. So T4 is actually going to make up 90% of the thyroid hormone in the bloodstream, and T3 only makes up 10%. But T3 is going to be the active form of thyroid hormone that actually affects these cells in the rest of the body. So what happens is T3, 10% of thyroid hormone is not enough to actually garner all the effects we need in the body. So the enzymes in the liver and kidney convert T4 into T3 so that it can be actually used in the body. So if you have a question that says, which thyroid hormone is actively used for the body? T3. Which thyroid hormone is more prevalent? T4. Don't mix that up. Now, T3 and T4 are going to enter certain cells, and they're actually going to enter almost every single type of cell in the body. So they're not confined to the thyroid gland. They're going to go all across the body, and they're going to enter into the plasma membrane and adhere to receptors in the mitochondria and the nucleus. So similar to steroid hormones, except steroid hormones go to the nucleus and the cytoplasm. Okay, so what do they do when they're inside the mitochondria? T3 and T4 are going to stimulate the production of ATP in the mitochondria, and in the nucleus, it's going to accelerate the sodium-potassium ATP pump. So both of these things are basically going to increase the metabolic rate. So that's why you hear people with hyperthyroidism, too much thyroid hormone, have super high metabolisms. They can eat as much as they want. They're never going to get fat, etc. But there are a lot of downsides because it does this at a rate that is unsustainable for most people. Now, one of the interesting things you might hear is that kids who are experiencing cold or who are in colder areas are going to have higher level of TSH. Why is that? That's because of the calorogenic effect of thyroid hormone. Basically, thyroid hormone is going to be heat generating, metabolism increasing. It's going to increase the amount of contractions of the heart, the force of contractions of the cardiac muscle, increase the sensitivity to sympathetic stimulation, red blood cell formation, and so many other things, but that is going to be for your own personal research. Now, let's talk about what else the thyroid hormone does. So if we remember, it's on here too, the thyroid hormone is going to produce parafollicular cells or C cells. These cells are going to be basically between the follicles, and they're going to have a couple of important things that they do, but the main role of parafollicular cells is to produce calcitonin to decrease the amount of calcium in the blood. So let's go to our next diagram. Here we're going to see, it looks more complicated than it actually is, but just try to follow along. So here's going to be calcitonin. Now, in order to decrease the amount of calcium in the bone, calcitonin does two main things. First, it's going to inhibit osteoclasts. So osteoclasts are basically going to be used for bone resorption. So if you have more osteoclasts, they're going to break down the bone, and then that calcium is going to get into the bloodstream and increase the levels of calcium in the blood. Think about it. If you had a bone, you chip off pieces of it, it goes into the blood, it's going to increase the blood calcium levels. So we're going to stop that. We're going to inhibit osteoclasts, preventing calcium from entering into the blood from the bone. Now, at the same time, it's going to also stimulate the kidney to remove calcium and to excrete it from the bloodstream through urine. Okay, so now let's talk about the parathyroid glands. Parathyroid glands have two different cell populations. They're going to have parathyroid cells and oxyphils. Oxyphils are pretty much mature versions that are going to produce parathyroid hormone, but at a much lower rate. So they're kind of like juvenile or band cells. So when you have a big infection and neutrophils aren't enough to compensate for it, then bone marrow is going to produce juvenile or band cells, which are not going to be ready to do everything, but they're still going to help a little bit. That's kind of like what oxyphils do. But you don't really need to know much about it. For now, just focus on the parathyroid cells, which produce parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone is going to increase the amount of calcium in the bloodstream. So how does it do that? PTH is basically going to inhibit osteoblasts. It's going to decrease the amount of calcium deposition into the bone, triggering the release of rankle, which stimulates osteoclasts to break down the bone, increasing calcium in the bloodstream. It's also going to have an effect on the kidneys and tell the kidneys to basically reabsorb calcium and prevent loss through urine. And then it's also going to stimulate the production of calcitriol in the intestine. And calcitriol's main function is going to be osteoprogenitor cells, osteoclasts, but mostly to help with the absorption of phosphate and calcium in the digestive system. Okay, so here are two questions that students often get when it comes to thyroid hormone. The first one's going to be, what levels of TSH, TRH, and T3 and T4 would you expect to see in a patient with Graves' disease? Now, Graves' disease is basically going to be when there is overstimulation of TSH receptors. Now, the common answer people are going to put is going to be high levels of T3, T4, high TRH, and high TSH. But that's not actually correct. If you have a lot of TSH being stimulated, so if Graves' disease stimulating TSH is going to lead to more production of T3 and T4. Remember, we mentioned TSH is going to increase the uptake of iodide into the follicular cells, aka helping with thyroid peroxidase, thyroglobulin, etc., and that's going to create T3 and T4. But if you have too much T3 and T4 because of stimulation of TSH, then you're not going to need it anymore. So think about it, for example. people who take steroids are going to have overproduction of testosterone, and then their body has no need to produce it on their own. This is the exact same thing. If you have too much stimulation of TSH receptors, you're going to have too much thyroid hormone and then no need for TSH or TRH anymore. Now, the correct answer would actually be high T3 and T4 and then low TRH and low TSH. It's basically what we call a negative feedback loop. Next one. So what is the effect of Hashimoto's thyroiditis on thyroid hormone levels? Now, Hashimoto's thyroiditis is going to be kind of the opposite, and it's going to be the gradual destruction of the thyroid gland due to antibodies created against thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin, and also leukocytes and T lymphocytes are going to enter into the thyroid gland and destroy the follicle cells, similar to a respiratory burst. Now, if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you might just think that the elimination of the thyroid gland is going to mean that you're just going to have hypothyroidism. But think about the respiratory burst part that I mentioned. Just like a respiratory burst, leukocytes and T lymphocytes enter into the thyroid gland and are basically going to break apart thyroid follicles. And what do thyroid follicular cells have inside of them? The thyroid hormone, T3 and T4. So if you burst all the follicular cells, all that T3 and T4 that's stored is going to be released, causing hyperthyroidism. And then once the actual follicles are destroyed in a longer period of time, you're not going to have any follicles left to produce the hormone, and you're going to have hypothyroidism. So the correct answer would be B.